If you want to practice all of the new PTE questions using artificial intelligence on an online portal that has a similar marking to your real PTE exam, head over to masterpte.com.au to create a free account. Here, you can practice all 4 sections separately and receive instant feedback for all of your speaking, writing, reading, and listening. You can also view and compare your answers with others who have already succeeded in achieving a high score. Download 9090 Band's template for speaking, writing, and listening. Take mock test, receive instant result, overall feedback, and in-depth analysis which helps you pinpoint exactly where you lose points. masterpte.com.au, the best PTE practice software in the world.
The UK population has doubled over the last 140 years, reaching a new high of 66 million people in 2017. We project there to be almost 73 million people in the UK by 2041. This growth is due to there being more births than deaths and more people moving to the UK than leaving. As well as growing, the population is also aging. From looking at past patterns, we project that more than a quarter of UK residents will be aged 65 years or over within the next 50 years. Ecological footprint accounting measures the demand on and supply of nature. On the demand side, the ecological footprint measures the ecological assets that a given population requires to produce the natural resources it consumes, including plant-based food and fiber products, livestock and fish products, timber and other forest products, space for urban infrastructure, and to absorb its waste, especially carbon emissions. The ecological footprint tracks the use of 6 categories of productive surface areas: cropland, grazing land, fishing grounds, built-up land, forest area, and carbon demand on land. On the supply side, a city, state or nation's biocapacity represents the productivity of its ecological assets, including cropland, grazing land, forest land, fishing grounds, and built-up land. These areas, especially if left unharvested, can also absorb much of the waste we generate, especially our carbon emissions.
Some years ago, a group of academics from different disciplines recognised the necessity of studying conflict as a phenomenon. They were interested in the distinct properties of conflict as it occurred in international relations, national politics, industrial relations, communities, or even in the domestic setting. These academics believed that approaches from different disciplines could be applied to the study of conflict with a view to better understanding its causes, effects and solutions. As a result, research groups developed, and universities and academic journals began to publish papers on conflict theory, as it came to be called. Unfortunately, many other academics didn't welcome this new discipline. They couldn't reconcile it with traditional scholarly practices because it had both a practical nature and an analytical approach. Nevertheless, the new discipline continued to develop, and the field grew and spread, and conflict theory now has the same prestige as other academic areas of research and study, despite the early criticism it attracted.
So there are two theories for how the gas giants formed. One is the same theory I showed you just now, core accretion, right? And the other is called disk instability. And one of our colleagues at DTM has done a lot of work on that. And so it's unclear exactly how they formed, but you're right, what we're trying to do, the reason we're trying to get to higher and higher pressure in the lab is because we're trying to understand more about the pressure inside the gas giants. It's thought that the gas giants also have a metallic core, but maybe a metallic core not made of iron. Hydrogen, for example, becomes metallic at a certain pressure. Okay, so it's very possible that the insides of these planets could have metallic cores, could have hydrogen cores, could have rocky portions. We're not sure, but the higher pressure we can get in the lab, the higher the pressure we can get in the lab, the closer we can get to understanding the interiors of the gas giants and the exoplanets that are so big.
Infinity is a perplexing idea which basically refers to something that grows without bound. No matter what number you might assign to something, infinity will be larger than that number. We make use of infinity in a number of ways in physics. We imagine that space conceivably could go on infinitely far. We imagine that in principle the universe could go on for an infinite amount of time. But in our calculations, if infinity turns up as the answer to something that we could directly measure with a piece of equipment, then we know that our calculation must be wrong. And we have used that as a diagnostic over many decades to tell us if you find infinity popping out of your equations for something you can measure, you better go back. think about those equations, modify them in some way in order to get a finite answer, as that's the only kind of answer that we could ever directly measure. As physicists try to explain the masses of particles, they found that if they just tried to inject the mass into the mathematical equations in the most straightforward way, just put a parameter for the mass of a particle right into the math didn't work. It gave rise to quantum mechanically inconsistent features. So it was recognized that you needed to have a more subtle way of introducing mass into the equations that would not spoil the fundamental symmetries, but yet would allow the particles to have different masses. You see, fundamentally, the idea is that all particles begin life as being massless. There's a high degree of symmetry associated with that. All of the particles have the same mass, 0. How do you inject mass without spoiling that symmetry, which is vital for the equations to make sense? The Higgs field does that. By immersing everything in this bath, this molasses-like bath, it turns out that the equations allow you to have your cake and eat it. The fundamental symmetries are deeply preserved, and yet the way in which the particles move, experiencing different resistance-like drag force, allows them to have different masses.
Machiavelli lived from 1469 to 1527. The philosopher Bertrand Russell referred to Machiavelli's most well-known book, The Prince, as a gangster's handbook. And while there's no doubt that certain people have read and used it as such, I think that if we put it into the context of when it was written, which was Italy, especially Florence, in the 15th and 16th centuries, it will be easier to judge Machiavelli's reasons for writing it. Now, the Italy of that period was made up of a number of city-states, often at war with each other. Add to that threats from foreign powers, especially France, and it was a very unstable and dangerous situation. Machiavelli loved his home city, Florence, and wanted to protect its culture, history, and above all, independence at all costs. One way to do this was to establish an army of Florentines loyal to the city-state of Florence. Much of Machiavelli's career was taken up with this issue. It must be remembered, though, that he led an active civic life, was deeply into politics, and was an ambassador for Florence. In this way, he got to meet and observe some of the key players of the time, and through this came to understand the nature of power and how to hold on to it. The Prince was an attempt to teach Florence the lessons he had learnt.
We appear to take it as a rule, or as a law of nature, that each species is adapted to the climate of its own home. For example, species from the Arctic, or even a temperate region, could not survive in a tropical climate, nor could a tropical species last long if it found itself at the South Pole. But it is true to say there's too much emphasis placed on the degree of adaptation of species to the climates where they live. We assume that this adaptation, if all species are descended from a single form, must have taken place over millions of years. Yet a large number of plants and animals brought from different countries remain perfectly healthy in their new home. Also, there are several examples of animal species that have extended their range, within historical times, from warmer to cooler latitudes, and the other way round. Rats and mice provide good examples. They have been transported by man to many parts of the world, and now have a far wider range than any other rodent, and they can be found living in the cold climate of the Faroe Islands to the north, through the tropical zones to the Falklands in the south. It is possible to see adaptation to any climate as a quality that is part of an inborn flexibility of the physical and mental constitution of most animals. Therefore, the ability to survive in the most different climates by both man and his domestic animals, and the fact that elephants once existed in an ice age while living species live in tropical areas, should not be seen as deviations from the rule, but as examples of this flexibility being brought into action under particular circumstances.
I suppose more and more people are starting to see graffiti as a form of art. Now, there are still many who would beg to differ, and they'd point to the destructive scribblings that we see on our bus shelters and our public buildings. These often take the form of tags, which are fancy scribble-like versions of someone's name or nickname. Tags generally have no aesthetic appeal, and they are the scourge of the high street shopkeeper in many a town. I can certainly see where the shopkeepers and property owners are coming from. But the fact is, graffiti has been around for a very long time indeed. People left their mark on cave walls back in prehistoric times, and it's been found too on ancient monuments in Egypt and Rome. But New York-style graffiti, which is really the forerunner of a lot of the graffiti that's getting done now, New York graffiti took off in the late 1960s. That's when the advent of the spray can allowed the humble tag to evolve into more complex styles. In the mid to late 70s, subway trains became the new forum for graffiti artists to display their skills. For many young people, it became a medium to express their disillusionment with a system from which they felt excluded. Now, of course, the art establishment embraces graffiti artists, and some of these artists have actually taken on cult status.
The brand is the talent. And let's stick with that sports analogy. The answer is you can spend $450 million on a stadium, but if over a 10-year period the player talent's no good and there are more losses than there are wins, there are going to be a lot more empty seats than there are full ones, right? no matter how good the marketing is, and no matter how beautiful the stadium is. The brand is the talent. Benison Biederman again. The leaders of great groups love talent and know where to find it. They revel in the talent of others. Only in the stupid world of business and government do we promote the best accountant to the head of the accounting department, the best salesman to the head of the sales department, the best trainer to the head of the training department. You don't do that in sports, right? The definition of most of our coaches at the professional level is they were second-rate or marginal players who were brilliant students of the game and people. That is, they were good. What are leaders good at doing? Leading. There was a guy when I was a kid, Yale University used to win the NCAA swimming championships year after year after year. And I've never seen this proven, but it sure doesn't surprise me. There was an interesting thing about their coach. He couldn't swim, but he could sure as heck motivate swimmers. And that's the point, isn't it? There's a thing called leadership.
If you want to practice all of the new PTE questions using artificial intelligence on an online portal that has a similar marking to your real PTE exam, head over to masterpte.com.au to create a free account. Here, you can practice all 4 sections separately and receive instant feedback for all of your speaking, writing, reading, and listening. You can also view and compare your answers with others who have already succeeded in achieving a high score. Download 9090 Band's template for speaking, writing, and listening. Take mock test, receive instant result, overall feedback, and in-depth analysis which helps you pinpoint exactly where you lose points. Masterpte.com.au, the best PTE practice software in the world.